by way of quick introduction, my name is Leslie Reddy. I head Cross-Boundary Southern Africa Advisory Practice and I'm based in Johannesburg. For those of you that are unfamiliar with us, Cross-Boundary is an investment firm. We're focused on unlocking the power of private capital and public capital in underserved markets. We do this through direct investment platforms as well as advisory, where we work with capital seekers to attract capital, investors to deploy capital, and third parties such as donors to catalyze capital into strategic areas such as climate. So I'll hand over to Heather and then Justin, and then I believe we've got Jean-Paul on the line as well.
Great, well, thank you so much. It's such a pleasure to be here today. I'd like to thank the Atlantic Council and DAI. Really looking forward to this conversation, also learning from all of you today. I'm Heather Lanigan. I'm the Regional Director for Sub-Saharan Africa at the U.S. Trade and Development Agency, also known as USTDA, and I look forward to getting into much more detail about what that is.
Hi, my name is Justin James. We are an organization that is a trusted partner of South African institutional pension funds into high growth equity products. We do mid-market private equity, infrastructure, unlisted property, mezz capital, and most recently venture capital. Within the venture capital space, we look to partner with SA venture firms to build opportunities, and where those opportunities are at the inflection point of scaling and internationalizing, we take a direct stake within that business. We then get one of our global partners to co-invest alongside us. We slingshot that business into their ecosystem where they've built the building blocks of success, and hopefully success breeds success.
Great, Jean-Paul.
Good morning, good afternoon, everybody. So thank you for having me. My name is Jean-Paul Mvogo. I'm a non-regional research fellow at the Atlantic Council. Prior to that, actually, I've been working for Global Development Partners, IMF, UNDP, and I am currently actually lead researcher at Campus Paris. I'm leading the research program controlled by the Mastercard Foundation, which aims actually at improving enterprise competence in Africa. So it's a pleasure being with you today, and it's a pleasure to share some insights on climate finance in Africa. Thank you.
Just a quick question, is everyone able to hear Jean-Paul clearly, or is it okay? Yeah. Jean-Paul, it's a little bit unclear. Maybe while we do the first questions, we can try and address some of the miking issues. That's okay. Great, well, maybe diving into it, and as our MC highlighted, there's been a lot of talk around COP and some of the commitments. It does seem that there's a very large pool of capital available to deploy into climate solutions, and obviously appetite to bring it to Africa, but the experience on the ground is a little bit different at times. So the ability to access that capital and bring forth bankable projects to capital providers is often where a big stumbling block is met. So perhaps turning to USTDA, USTDA has a very strong role to play in de-risking some of the more innovative approaches to climate finance and climate projects, and ultimately connecting US firms and African partners, both from a technology and capital perspective as well. So maybe, Heather, I'll hand over to you to just elaborate about the toolkit and some of the innovative models you may have seen already.
Great, thank you so much, Leslie. For those that haven't worked with USTDA, USTDA is the US government's project preparation agency. We work alongside US industry to support the development of climate-smart infrastructure in emerging markets. By infrastructure, obviously climate underpins all of our work. We primarily work in sectors such as digital infrastructure, clean energy, transportation, healthcare, and agribusiness. Of course, these are sectors that are key to economic growth in our partner countries, but also sectors that present excellent opportunities for US company engagement, commercial opportunities, and US exports. As noted, climate is really the foundation of everything that we do. Resiliency, adaptation, mitigation, it really is a theme through all of those sectors as we look to, and I'll talk about our tools momentarily, but as we look to deploy our resources, it's always how we focus our lens. In 2021, USTDA launched the Global Partnership for Climate Smart Infrastructure alongside US industry associations and US government agencies. We had ambitious goals of increasing our footprint around the world, particularly in Africa. And since the launch of that initiative, we have supported 80 activities that have the potential to leverage over $70 billion in climate finance. As mentioned, Sub-Saharan Africa is one of our largest portfolios. And it's my job, so I can say proudly that I think it's really based on the strength of our partnerships and, of course, the incredible potential for infrastructure growth across the continent. So the way that we work, and I certainly have many examples that I hope to discuss throughout our conversation today, is we primarily have two tracks of funding. We're best known for our grant-based financing for project preparation. So USTDA works at the earliest stages to structure bankable infrastructure deals. So we work at the pre-financing stages to assess technology options, develop business models through things such as feasibility studies, technical assistance, and pilot projects. Across the continent right now, there's about 75 ongoing activities in the sectors that I mentioned. Clean energy has been a very large part of that, much to do to Power Africa, that was over its 10 years now in the making. But really incredible projects ongoing, both of the public and private sector. And I think to illustrate the impact of USTDA's work, again, because we're at the project preparation stage, we're not financing, we're really helping our projects, our partners and their projects meet their goals. And so I think, I was looking at recently at our portfolio in Nigeria. We have an incredible portfolio of off-grid projects. And in just a couple of years, including during the pandemic, many of our partners were able to scale up their businesses, including a company called Darway Coast, who works in the off-grid space. USTDA provided a feasibility study to assess the expansion of their services to 80 communities and 15 commercial industrial partners or entities. And as a result of our work, by the end of this year, they'll be providing services to 30,000 customers. But also as a result of feasibility study work, they were able to secure financing, Naira-based financing from InfraCredit, from Chapel Hill Denham, from First City Monument Bank, all on in the Energy Access Relief Fund. I have to look at it because there's so many financiers working on this project. But I think that illustrates where USTDA plays a very important role. While we're not financing, we're helping our partners structure their projects for financing and working with financiers throughout the life cycle. The other very important part of our programming is our partnership building events. And I want to emphasize these because there's a lot of really incredible opportunities on the horizon to work with USTDA. So as mentioned, our goal is to connect US companies to the public and private sector across the continent to help address their goals. And so we host events such as reverse trade missions to the United States, where we bring our partners to the US to meet with US companies, to exchange best practices. We just, at the end of October, early November, hosted a Climate Innovation Week with about 25 leaders from across the continent focused on early warning systems, emergency response, and water resource management. It was a really incredible week. We went to LA, New Orleans, and Washington, DC, of course. And I've seen results just since that visit a month ago, or 2 months ago. No, a month ago. We're still in December. Great. Just the partnerships that we built. Upcoming, I just want to share too, we have many activities on the horizon. We have a series of events with South Africa to support the Just Energy Transition Partnership, workshops and reverse trade missions focused on green hydrogen, municipal energy transmission, and that's a very important part of our program in South Africa. We're also collaborating with the African Development Bank in March for a workshop focused on green and sustainable financing. We're really excited about that and our work with the AFDB, and so more info will come on that. And we just actually approved funding last week to host a delegation from Nigeria focused on methane abatement for oil and gas. So sorry for all of that information, but I wanted to share the events because we want you to be part of those events. It's really important to USTDA. We're one agency of the US government, but the most important part of our program and the success of our program is solely due to our partnerships, including those in the room today. So I'll stop there, Leslie, but hopefully have a chance to go back to some of the strategic partnerships later on.
Thank you, perfect. And I think the point that you mentioned around convening is a very valid one. So, you know, often when we're thinking about solutions to catalyze financing, we think of the direct provision of the capital, but actually convening partners that bring together project sponsors and capital providers, and bring the opportunity to one another is incredibly important. And maybe a good segue to jump to Justin as a capital provider. So when we're thinking about financing climate solutions, there are kind of two tracks that I would divide it into. So the first is finding financing to pioneering transactions. So those where the business model might not yet be proven, the revenue model is uncertain, but the technology seems promising. So there's that track, and then there's also, once those solutions are then scaled and eventually start generating returns, the ultimate fact is that the capital space becomes competitive, and we're seeing this a little bit in the renewable energy space. And at that point, there's a need to shift both capital providers but business models as well. So I think my question really is, how do capital providers think about the incentives needed to both finance and then adapt to those scenarios?
Yeah, so maybe it's worth just taking a step back or two and just understand that globally in like developed markets, energy isn't really always an issue. And so with climate change, it's a nice to have as a long-term goal. Unfortunately, in Africa, a lot of the energy solutions provided by the government are actually breaking down. And so renewable energy and clean energy is like an imperative. If we don't create alternative energy sources, we have rolling blackouts. And so there's been drive from government to say, well, how do we empower and partner through a public-private solution where we can build these solutions and provide energy to the population. And so within Southern Africa, we've been running a REPRO program where the government has been cross-subsidizing people who are building renewable energy plants, that their tariffs are subsidized. And initially through REAP 1 to 5, but through 1 to 3 or going down, it was quite profitable for commercial investors to look at it. Now it's not really providing the commercial returns for the big pension funds to participate anymore. The market has evolved now where the asset managers are now looking at energy solutions and working with developers to create those solutions for the corporates and for the commercial and industrial mines. So a good example is the Amazon building is being erected in Cape Town. They are looking for a net neutral energy solution. They have used one of our partners that we've backed in the energy space and the infrastructure space. They've built a solar plant in, I kid you not, a place called Hot as Hell in the Northern Cape. And they push that energy into the grid, and so that the Amazon building, which is a US corporate, is net neutral on energy. What I've really liked to hear, which is what Heather's been talking about, is a lot of the managers that we will back within this space, they've got certain mandates. They can't just invest into ideas that aren't bankable yet. And so like a lot of their problems are is they see a lot of interesting things, but their mandates don't actually allow them to do that. So USTDA, working with organizations to make projects bankable, can then get funding from us, who then write the equity checks, who then, once they've got an equity check in, provide them to go to the banks to get the debt financing, and that's how these projects really scale up. So it's good to have events like this so that we can network to understand what everybody's doing. I would say that energy and infrastructure is definitely the flavor of the month. But it's because we have problems, and these are the solutions that are going to solve those problems.
Great, thanks, Ashton. And maybe to unpick a little bit more on the pioneering side of it. So, are there different models? And I know some of the managers that you work with have accessed sources of catalytic capital. So how have those been deployed to finance innovative climate tech solutions?
Yeah, so on the traditional infrastructure side, as I was saying, you need bankable solutions. On our venture capital side, where we're happy to take a little bit more risk, we're seeing venture firms who are engineering and scientific experts looking at these early stage solutions that are funding them and helping them get to a bankable stage. I think, Heather, you're probably funding or supporting those types of solutions along the way. So it's definitely building these rails along the journey is what's going to make it successful. So what USAID's done is that they were a pre-seed investor. That, from an institutional perspective, was too risky for us to allocate to. USAID actually granted them $1 million grant to run an early stage incubation program to build those opportunity sets. What they're now doing is creating a Series A fund for climate change solutions. Now that becomes appealing for us as an innovator investing into like venture firms and venture opportunities. So it looks like everything's sort of coming together. It definitely does take time, and so hopefully we can build on the success of what everybody's doing.
Great, thank you. I think that point around blending capital at the right point, so either upstream financing for feasibility, accessing sources of seed capital that institutional investors can't get behind, and then ultimately catalyzing commercial returns and commercially minded investors is a really strong example of how the different sources of capital play at different points in a transaction's journey. We at Cross Boundary tend to like to say that every deal is a blended finance deal, and we've just discussed some of the typical blended finance solutions, so technical assistance, first loss, or working capital financing. But really, we say this because every transaction has some externality, positive or negative. And when we're thinking about climate, I think we'd be very hard-pressed to find any deal that has absolutely zero impact on climate, right? So blended finance is really just combining the different sources of capital, whether it's private, philanthropic, and public, to deliver an outcome that is desired from a climate perspective. And within that category, the way that we blend it really depends, I guess, on two things. So one is whether we're trying to incentivize investment into pioneering deals, so those that are, as you mentioned, ones that make commercial sense and are viable, such as commercial and industrial solar, like you mentioned, and they just need an example of a transaction to absorb what we call the first mover disadvantage. Or is it something more structural where, for example, in the mini-grid space, you've got new connection cost of around anywhere between $100 and $1,000, let's say in Nigeria, and a household average ability to pay off about $5 per month, which leads to a very extended repayment window. And so ultimately, you need long-term sources of subsidy and capital to make it investable for commercial investors at a different point in the capital stack. So turning to Jean-Paul, and I hope that the miking situation has resolved itself. But when you're thinking about solutions in green financing and results-based financing, how have you seen it applied to these structural and/or first mover challenges?
So thank you very much for the question. I hope that the sound is better now.
It's a bit better.
Okay. So basically, I think that the panel members, they highlighted something which is very important. Africa needs a lot of resources to finance its green transition. And definitely the continent is a new frontier for green finance. So I think if I were to give a bit of background here, each year Africa needs basically 280 billion in order to meet its Paris Agreement commitment. And the continent is only receiving basically roughly 30 billion of that amount. So into that actually, I don't see a constraint, but I see a promise. I see actually a source of opportunities for private investors. And on the continent, actually, private sector investment in the green sector only account for 14%. So definitely there's an opportunity, and definitely blended finance can be actually a solution to address that gap. And be it actually synthetic loans, be it actually metal instruments, or other type of vehicles provided by blended finance, definitely we need that type of solutions in order to transfer the risk from private investors, or to share the risk between private investors and public investors. So definitely private blended finance for the continent is an opportunity. It has been used, as highlighted by the other panel members over the last years. And if you consider, for example, the clean energy sector in Africa, there is a lot of promises. The Climate Policy Initiative, for example, highlighted that just for 5 African countries, South Africa included, let's see the potential for clean energy blended finance amounted actually to 72 billion USD. So definitely there are opportunities, and actually that type of instrument can really come and be a good solution for the continent.
Great, thank you. Sorry, go ahead.
No, actually, thank you. I hope you heard me.
Yes, yes, I think it was a lot clearer towards the end. So I think you've touched on an important point, which is that a lot of the financing that's currently being attracted to Africa is focused on clean energy specifically, and more generally risk mitigation. I'm wondering if any of the panelists have any comments on adaptation financing and how that plays into the overall financing picture.
Do you want to go ahead? Just clarify when you mean adaptation finance.
So adaptation, so as opposed to mitigation, to sequester carbon from the atmosphere, we're looking more at climate resilience. So financing for resilient infrastructure like flood infrastructure and protection.
Yeah, so I mean, I would definitely say because the energy grids within Southern Africa and in other parts of Africa are failing. That is primarily the focus. We're also looking at like wind energy, hydro energy, but preventative, I would not say that that's a big focus at the moment. None of our managers are really looking at that. What has been a focus is within Africa, if the climate increases, the climate temperature increases by 1 to 2 degrees, that actually has a massive impact on our agri-sector and our food security. And so there are solutions going into figuring out food security and how we can make that a lot more efficient. Within the Western Cape, about 5 years ago, we actually had a natural drought where we weren't being provided with any water to the households. We were being rationed. And so a lot of the solutions that we're doing now is how do we help commercial and industrial reuse the water in their manufacturing processes? So we're building on-site plants where off-runs of water are being treated and turned into potable water. As a commercial investor, we can sign long-term water PPA agreements with those clients, which make it quite attractive for our commercial investors.
Thanks.
I think one thing that I observed as a challenge, I'd be curious about others' perspective, when we hosted the recent Climate Innovation Week, which I mentioned was focused on water resource management, emergency response. One thing in talking with the delegates, which were from, it could be the federal, state, provincial, municipal level, was the challenges, for example, with water. There are a lot of stakeholders and a lot of different budgets to balance when you're looking at investing in infrastructure. And so had very interesting conversations with some officials who were saying it's a challenge. I mean, everyone knows that there's an importance to focus the resources, but there's a lot of different stakeholders with very strong, obviously, opinions and limited budgets. And that is always a challenge, I think, when you're looking at sectors that cross many different divisions of authority, and whether that's at the government level or just across different work streams too. So I don't know if others feel the same way. I mean, emergency response is certainly in other areas are maybe it's a little bit more clean cut, but that's something that I've been thinking a lot about since meeting with the delegates of the challenges of the priorities, but also how to utilize different budget streams.
Yeah, I think, sorry, go ahead.
So just to follow on your thoughts, it's like a lot of water problems are being managed through government. And as you rightly say, there's government at a top level, at a regional level, at a municipal level, at a district level. And along the chain, things don't always work. And what's happening now is I think the public is maybe getting a bit frustrated. And so private capital is stepping in and solving these problems. It's a bit strange that sometimes once you start solving problems, government steps in and restricts things because it is their domain. But we need to work through those, and we need to come up with partnership solutions where private and government work together to solve problems for everyday people so that, energy and clean water is available, because without that, you're not going to have growth. And these are some of the basic things that if we put them together, Africa could really thrive.
Yeah, I think that was really well said. It seems like there's still quite a lot of work to do in terms of identifying, which models need government funding, so those that just don't have a natural payer. And I think water is a space where it's really challenging to get someone used to the idea of needing to pay a commercial rate for water versus the subsidized level that we typically see, versus more bankable models for things like insurance protection against flooding and those types of solutions. We've got a couple of minutes left. I do want to open up for the floor. Maybe we can take 3 questions and then we'll address them collectively.
Any questions? Don't make me come to you. Or it can be contributions as well. Opinions, questions,
Definitely contributions as well.
Okay, yes, sir.
My name is Andrew Mack. I'm the CEO of AfriNEXT. We are a platform a tech platform connecting small farmers with markets. And so I'm trying to pull together the last 2 panels, if I could. You're talking a lot about environment and climate as if it were a separate thing. And I know a lot from what we saw at COP that there was a great attempt to try to connect agriculture to the climate debate, in part because in this world of investment and development, we see an awful lot of moving. It's like 8th grade soccer where people all flock to the ball and the ball moves over and everyone flocks to the ball and then everyone flocks to the ball, and we're not taking advantage of the interconnectedness of the different sectors. So I guess given the 2 panels, can you talk a little bit about how the work that you're doing connects the dots between climate and agriculture, since that obviously is going to be a big focus over the longer term for the continent? Thank you.
Good afternoon, my name is Kaushik Ray. I'm on a panel later with Heather, and I just wanted to plug that, but also to say that we're going to do a little deeper dive on COP28 and climate finance as well, and very much appreciate the question on agribusiness. But I just wanted to say there's more to come. There's obviously this topic is a really large and deep one, but specifically on the climate finance, on the adaptation, on the development agenda, we'll be doing a deeper dive at 2.
So I'm happy to start off. For the first gentleman, I think you're 100% right. Like, if you don't have the proper infrastructure in place, there's no way a country or a region or a continent can grow. I'm pretty sure people have run the numbers on what the rolling blackouts within Africa has caused to GDP, and it's significant. And that also has an impact on jobs and sustainability. And so we have to look at this thing collectively. We have to say, where are the infrastructure weak points that we can build on? How do we then get government to solve it? If government can't solve it, how do we get professional private managers to come in and build solutions to solve that? And we need to understand that we talk about climate change, but in Africa, we just need energy. And clean energy is great because we have a lot of sun and it's renewable, and the sun's for free. So, how do we build those solutions to make it sustainable within an African context? And I think if we can solve that, then we're definitely looking at a brighter future. The demographics within Africa are very young. It's a growing working population where a lot of developed markets are aging. If you're looking at like a future workforce, it's definitely Africa. We just need to solve the infrastructure and the energy solutions and protect it through clean water. And also at the same time, we haven't really spoken about it, but waste, and how do we remove waste from the ecosystem cleanly and safely and not put carbon dioxide into the atmosphere. I would say we're at the start of our journey now. Having these discussions, it sounds like everybody's doing a little bit of everything haphazardly, or not haphazardly, but in their silos. These kind of discussions kind of identify who's doing what. If we can streamline that and make it work efficiently, that's where we're going to see the multiplier effects. So I'm hoping that within a few years' time, we can come back and everything's looking a lot greener. Excuse the pun.
Right. Well, actually, I want to touch on the interconnectedness between climate and agri. So I think I mentioned every deal is a climate deal, really. There's always some sort of impact on climate, and what we want is to incent activities that promote responsible agriculture and climate-smart agriculture. So to that extent, there are various interventions that one can take, and maybe I'll just touch on some of the ones that we're working closely with. So we take an investment facilitation approach often to transaction advisory. So where there is a desired outcome, such as incentivizing climate-smart agriculture development and investment into that space, we will work with donors such as USAID, also MasterCard Foundation, and others to connect the sponsors and capital seekers for those interventions and the capital providers for that. So perhaps just a couple of examples. So we work extensively on the MasterCard Bridge to Agriculture program, which focuses on catalyzing investment into the agri space in Ghana. And there it is working with financial institutions who are natural providers of capital to attract concessional capital, for example, from the MasterCard Foundation to deploy into responsible agriculture. The second piece is also advisory around how to monetize and diversify the sources of revenue for agriculture businesses, for example, that are often otherwise lacking bankability on a standalone revenue model. So one such project that I can highlight is our work with USAID in Mozambique. So there, we're working on the Planeta program, and I'm not a native Portuguese speaker, so I'm not going to try and decompose that acronym. But essentially, it's an investment facilitation program for carbon projects. So it provides support to structure carbon projects with a carbon credit offtake, and then attract financing for that as well. And there is room to support regenerative agriculture projects and other climate smart interventions. So all to say that there are different ways to enable the private sector to attract sources of climate funding into the agri space through donor-supported mechanisms.
Can I make a comment, and not to try to be controversial in any way, but so with a lot of the infrastructure solutions that we're backing, we're obviously looking for financing, and we generally the equity check in quite a big solution, and the banks are the debt providers. But who we see generally on the African continent from an equity provider into the funds or into the deals is we see a lot of European DFIs. I'm not too sure why I don't see any American DFIs. And maybe because of that, when we start looking at the projects and we start looking at who the developers are of these big projects that happen in Africa, it just so happens to be a European developer or a Japanese developer who's coming in and helping Africans build these solutions. I think we need to somehow foster a relationship, how we start working with the Americans, because you obviously have the expertise, but I just don't see you happen to be on the continent. Maybe I don't see every deal, but that's just been my experience.
I think just to jump in on that, I don't want to speak for the U.S. Development Finance Corporation, but they recently obviously gained equity authority, and I would expect over the years we'll see a significant increase in that tool for sure. I wanted to briefly comment too just on the integration of infrastructure. I was thinking about this. USTDA has traditionally worked project by project, but I would just note many of you may have been following the Partnership for Global Infrastructure and Investment, also called PGI, because there's always an acronym. And that has been, it's a very important priority for President Biden. And the first real project, the hallmark project, has been the Lobito corridor in southern Africa. And I think that's been an interesting approach, and we're certainly involved with that too. It's really looking at the integration of infrastructure in a way that the US government hasn't approached things in recent history. So certainly ag is a very important part of the corridor, transportation, critical minerals, energy, digital infrastructure. And I'm excited about that. And certainly we're also challenged, I think, really differently right now of who we're working with. How do we partner, whether it's the multilaterals, the private sector, how can we all work together on this corridor? So I think I'm excited about that. Obviously much more to come, but I did want to flag that related to agribusiness.
Great. Jean-Paul, is there anything you'd like to add, perhaps on the climate discussion?
Yes, definitely. I think that beyond the case-by-case approach, we need actually to work on cooperative models, meaning, let's say, how actually are we going to, on a more systemic way, combine actually local stakeholders, the microfinance institutions which are closer to the farmers, with, let's say, national banks, Pan-African banks, and then GFIs and international stakeholders and private investors, actually. So there's a need actually to work on those cooperative models. And that actually is it's important because actually right now, it is estimated that agri-market in Africa by 2030 is estimated to reach actually $1 trillion USD. But currently, most of those farmers are underserved. They are not served actually by financial markets. So this is where actually we have to build and let's rush in order to work on those cooperative models in a more systemic way.
Thank you. I think we've only got 2 minutes left, so I'm just going to ask the panelists each for any closing remarks and thoughts that they'd like to leave the audience with. So maybe starting with Heather, then Justin, and then Jean-Paul.
Well, first, I look forward to continuing the conversation this afternoon. This has been really enjoyable, so thank you very much. I think it's just one thing to note. I think there's a real role the public sector needs to play in de-risking transactions. The private sector is eager, but I see that, and USTDA certainly is part of that. There's an incredible opportunity, and I think the public and private sector working together, and many other stakeholders too, is the key to success.
I would agree with you 100%. There's a lot of projects that are going to go on the African continent, and we're attracting commercial capital to invest. If we can somehow partner with local governments, but with international agencies to de-risk the whole solution, I think we can create a sustainable outcome.
So definitely, I would like to stress the fact that Africa is a resilient continent, and it showed and it proved that during the COVID crisis, where everybody thought that actually that continent was going to be the main victim of COVID, and it showed that actually it was not the case. So if I were an investor, I would bet on Africa as far as climate change is concerned, as actually many people are working to make that continent a champion of the green economy of tomorrow. Thank you.
Great, thank you.
Right. Ladies and gentlemen, a round of applause for our speakers and our contributors.